Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Arborists Question Time. I'm John Parker, Technical Director at the Arboriculture Association here in Stonehouse, and I'll be your host for this evening. First of all, I'd like to explain the format of the show. In a moment, I'll be introducing our expert panel, and they will each tell you their answer to this week's question. You, the audience, will then be invited to vote in a poll to say which one of those three answers you most agree with at this very moment in time. Then our panelists will each have 5 minutes to present their position, after which we'll make a start on the questions. Each panelist will have a strictly timed 1 minute to answer each question. You can submit a question at any time using the question and answer button at the bottom of your screen, and we'll try and get through as many as we can. The audience has been muted, the chat function switched off, so please only communicate with us through the Q&A box. And at the end of the show, each panelist will have 1 minute to summarize their thoughts, and then the same poll will be reopened again for an audience vote to see if anyone's changed their mind. Feel free to use social media throughout with the hashtag ArbQT. So on to today's show. We all know that in recent years, trees have been moving steadily up the political agenda and public consciousness to the point where in the last UK election, every political party had some kind of tree planting promise, often involving ever escalating and sometimes rather unrealistic numbers. Unfortunately, the concept of arboriculture and the profile of those working in our industry doesn't seem to have kept pace with this obsession for getting new trees in the ground. Consideration is rarely given to how those trees are produced, where they come from, how they'll be established, where they'll be maintained and how they'll be maintained in the long term, or crucially, who will be doing all of those things. Few people seem to know the word arboriculture, and even those who do seem not to understand the diversity of roles available or what a highly skilled and professional industry we've become. So this evening, we ask the question, how can our industry best promote the importance of arboriculture as a profession? Let's meet our panel.
Hi, I'm Sharon Durdant-Hollamby. I am Vice President of the Institute of Chartered Foresters. I'm a Chartered Arb and Director of Sharon Hosgood Associates. And I believe the best way to promote arboriculture is through membership of our professional bodies.
Hi, I'm Greg Packman from the London Borough of Islington and also the Urban Tree Festival Steering Committee, and I believe the best way to promote arboriculture is through active public engagement.
Hi, I'm Cecil, Professor of Urban Forestry at the University of British Columbia, Vancouver, Canada. And I believe that the best way to promote arboriculture is to truly engage in partnerships with other professions and disciplines.
Great stuff. Thank you, everybody. So if we could just have the poll put up there, please, my lovely assistant. There we go. So how can our industry best promote the importance of arboriculture as a profession? If you'd all like to vote, just give you 20 seconds or so. It's a nervous moment for our panelists as they see the scale of the task ahead of them. We're creeping up, here we go. Sharon's got it all to do here. Okay, that's about it, I reckon. Let's close it off there. So top is public engagement. So Greg, you're in pole position, closely followed by Cecil, partnering with other professions, and then Sharon. Well, you've got a lot of ground to make up, but I've got confidence you can do it. Professionalism and chargeship down there on just 15%. So if we could get rid of the poll, please. Let's go on to our first presentation then, which is from Sharon.
Our job is amazing. Have you ever thought about the range of skills and knowledge you use every day? From physics, biology, soil science, IT, counselling, persuasion, presentation and writing. I can't think of many other professions that cover such a wide range as ours. And also we need a lot of soft skills. And we get to work with trees. They're widely understood to be part of the climate change solution and also integral to our physical and mental well-being. But who knows what we do? And what can we do about the lack of understanding and people coming forward? Well, in my view, the cornerstone of promoting ARB is professionalism and by membership of professional bodies. by being the best we can and working together, we can increase our impact. But what does professionalism mean? Well, the general public consider that professionalism means being trustworthy, credible, competent, hang on, not doing what I'm doing. There we go. And, sorry about that. And the Institute of Chartered Building asked the general public and saying, who would you trust most? And they all said a member of a professional body. And in ARB, we have the Arboricultural Association, the Institute of Chartered Foresters, the Consulting Arborists Association, NATO, the RFS, and the International Society of ARB, each of them bringing different strengths. But what they all bring are opportunities to learn, to share, to disagree, form friendships, develop new practice, and provide career advice to set us on our way. And we then take this in our work to be advocates for ARB. And particularly at this time, I know that many of us really value the friendship of our community, all the teaching and sharing and chatting we've been doing. While the Arboricultural Association scheme for ARB approved contractor provides that quality assurance, we need to stamp out the white van person brigade. And membership at whatever level is right for you is essential for your own development and promoting arboriculture. You know, getting together is a two-way process. It's not just for learning, it's for pushing boundaries and exploring ideas. We need disruptors right now to keep fresh, face those new challenges of climate change, pests and diseases, the whims of decision makers, and what looks like changes in employment. We're all ambassadors, whatever our role in ARB. Speaking to others, neighbours, friends, and children is so important to get new people engaged. And I believe that chartered status within the ICF is a badge of excellence with international recognition. Wherever you work, it denotes your status within the profession. It gives you parity with other professionals, architects, engineers, scientists, whoever you work with every day. And this notion of parity and recognition across professions is so important, especially if you're feeling overlooked. So I believe that belonging makes us stronger, makes us more visible, makes us more influential. So I put it to you that being a professional, being chartered or a member of an accredited scheme has never been more important. We are the ambassadors of our profession, and it's never mattered more. So let's never leave the important decisions to others about trees. Let's be so professional, so passionate, so knowledgeable, and such a pleasure to work with that it would be unthinkable for us to be overlooked again. The inspiration, support and guidance of our professional bodies are a springboard for us to promote not only arboriculture, but for trees themselves. So thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Sharon. And now on to Greg's presentation.
Hi, so I'm talking about why it's so important for us to promote arboriculture through public engagement. I also talked briefly about the Urban Tree Festival, which is happening at the moment. Started last Saturday, running through to Sunday, available on an internet near you. So, why, as professionals, should we be engaging with the public? Well, first off, it's so people actually know who we are, what we do, and why what we do is important. I'm sure, like everyone else, I've had to spend a significant part of my professional career actually telling people how to pronounce my job title before even explaining what it is we do. Also, to encourage the next generation of arborists, they've got to come from somewhere, and if they don't know who we are, why on earth are they going to come and work with us? But also, on the whole, people, with a few exceptions, do care about trees and they want to know more about them, so we should be the people to tell them about trees. And I know this from my own experience of doing quite a bit of public engagement work over the past 5 years, is that actually when you actually go to work with the public, you build the trust from the public towards the profession. So stakeholder engagement is the first way. that I've worked with. There's friends groups all over the country, and we're seeing more and more specific tree forums coming up. Now, these are people who care about trees, but they don't necessarily, and this is a generalization, have the technical knowledge that we do as arborists. Yet they sort of see what they believe to be bad management and take issues with it. And that's where we need to come in to work with them to explain what it is that we're doing. And there have been quite a few high-profile conflicts over the years, which has deteriorated trust. Now, this image on the right, it was from earlier in the year, before lockdown. And this is with the Friends of Alexandra Park in Haringey, North London. And I'm explaining to the group why I've effectively decapitated this hornbeam. And in doing so, I'm telling the group about the tree inspection process, risk management, about the problems of building a wall that close to a tree through the root plate. You can't see it, but the base of the tree was engulfed in Ganoderma resinaceum. The foliar condition of the canopy was awful, but leaves were tiny and was so sparse. So although people were sad to see the loss of the tree, by actually working with the group and explaining that process, people were much more understanding of why we had removed trees. I'm very grateful that we left it as a very tall habitat stem. And the gentleman in the foreground with the rucksack and the green and black coat, he's one of the local councillors for Haringey, so he was very interested to sort of see what the decision making was in a place that he had great interest in. Now, public engagement, especially now under lockdown, there is huge awareness of the role of trees and people wanting to know more about them. But on the whole, when you're new to it, learning about trees can be quite an intimidating process. And people do want to learn from the experts. So we need to make sure that we're the experts who are being listened to. Not, and I appreciate the hypocrisy in me saying this, but not some self-professed Twitter expert, but the actual experienced people within the industry. And people love the idea that there are people out there dedicated to working with trees. And since 2015-16, I've done a lot of guided tree walks and public presentations. 2019 alone, I did about 25 tree walks and half a dozen presentations to about, well, over 600 people in total. And every single one of them walked away not just knowing more about trees, but actually knowing about arboriculture as a profession and how to actually pronounce the word. But what I found is that people appreciate an insight into technical tree management, but they really love hearing about the history, the heritage and the folklore of trees. And I found that aiming it at that level, the history, heritage and folklore and culture, is a great way of engaging people to get them to learn more about trees and to get them to care and respect and value trees, because if people don't care or value trees, they won't respect it. If they don't respect trees, then why on earth would they, want to value trees even more? So to inspiring the next generation, on the whole, people don't know about arboriculture. We need to reach out and tell people what arboriculture is and engage them to come into the industry. I've always been a bit taken aback by how many people in the industry have come into arboriculture as a way to stage career changes. So it shows that there's a lot of people out there who really want to work with trees but just haven't always known about it as a career. And then the entry routes and access methods just aren't always there. But we really need to do that to boost recruitment into the industry to keep skilled professional people coming forward. Now, a bit about the Urban Tree Festival. I'm not just trying to promote a festival that I've been involved in organising, but it's a now online event thanks to lockdown. And it's promoting urban trees to the public, and it's led by not just professionals, but artists, authors, web designers, gardeners, architects, all manner of people who care about trees to maximise that public exposure. But also, when experts talk about trees, we tend to talk at an expert level, and especially with authors, they know how to communicate to people on a way that they can understand. So that's deliberately why it's as wide-ranging as it is. So yeah, check out the website if there's any events you are interested in. But it's, to me, a great example of public engagement because it started off as a London-focused event, but thanks to lockdown, we've gone on the internet, and now we're not just a nationwide online festival, but we've had participants from all over the world. So this has been a fantastic way of actually reaching so many members of the public. And that's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Greg. That's it, stop sharing. So now our final panelist presentation from Cecil.
Thanks, everybody. Really wise words said by my two distinguished colleagues. But my position today is a little bit different. I would argue that for all of this to happen and for arboriculture to be truly recognized, we need to, first of all, have true and meaningful collaboration with other disciplines, with other fields, with other industries. We are, as Sharon already said, in a very exciting area of work. Arboriculture is extremely interesting. There's a lot of skills we'll bring to the fore. We have made a lot of advances over the years in terms of practice, in terms of research, even in terms of policy and legislation. But for us to really move forward, we have to be better in collaborating, and we have to also be wider recognized by other disciplines. So we've seen during recent times, during the current COVID pandemic, the importance again of trees. People are flocking to their local parks, trying to find some respite from all these terrible things that are happening around us. But having said that, trees are still seen often as icing on the cake in policy arenas. We're often not the professionals that are first called to the table when issues emerge, even around trees. So how do we move forward with that? How do we actually make sure that we are seen as more important these days? And how do we get our field recognized? Well, as one famous Nobel laureate once said, the times they are changing. So actually we see that trees are maybe in the center today of several discussions. We see climate change, of course, where trees and urban forests can play a very important role in mitigating and adapting cities to the effect of this. We also see public health debates. How do we make sure that we keep our urban populations healthy, both mentally, physically, and socially? We also see the current COVID epidemic, as I already mentioned, with a renewed interest in our local green spaces. But also issues like biodiversity loss, economic development. Trees can definitely be part of that. But I'm really afraid that, or afraid to say maybe, that it's not us arborists or urban foresters who are going to be the ones moving this agenda forward, at least not alone. If we want to be successful, we have to have the support of other professionals. And I will focus on three groups today: the engineers, public health professionals, and then what I would call the other green professionals that are maybe in similar fields to us, but actually we see a lot of tension between us, arboriculturalists, urban foresters, and some of these other professions. So let's start with the engineers. I sometimes put slides up in my presentations about the dark profession, about people who have no clue what trees are really doing. And of course I'm exaggerating, because engineers are crucial to the work we're doing. So we know some really good examples of how engineers and arboriculturalists are working together in a more meaningful way. One example of this is in Milwaukee, a city in the United States, where engineers and urban foresters jointly go out and look at tree projects and also look at infrastructure projects. So we have to move engineers from the idea that trees are a nuisance to trees as a benefit, for example, in terms of stormwater regulation and cooling. And there are, again, examples of that. Green architecture, green buildings like the Bosco Verticale, the vertical forest in Milan, of course, are a very interesting work of architecture, of engineering, but also of arboriculture. Why is it not us who get a lot of the credit for that? So if we get engineers and arborists to work together on this, we can probably replicate some of these ideas and make them more sustainable and meaningful. The second group I would mention here are the public health professionals. So we know there's a lot of focus on improving people's health and well-being, and people living in cities are not always doing so well in that sense. I think many of us have gained the COVID-20 these days in terms of not being physically active very much. Of course, urban forests, green spaces can really help us be that. So here in Canada, we have a group called the Doctors for the Environment that have been really active in promoting access to green spaces. Our provincial health officer in British Columbia has, throughout the crisis, maintained that we should be outside. And being outside actually will be so important for our mental and physical health that actually is more important than the potential spread of a virus. So how do we work together with public health officials? Well, in the United States, an organization called ParkRx is prescribing access to nature and physical exercise in nature as part of its medical program. It's a physician called Robert Zarr who has been working on this together with other colleagues. So there are inroads, there are starts of how medicine and arboriculture are starting to collaborate. And then the third group, maybe obvious, but how do we work together in more meaningful and better ways in mutual respect with other green professions? And I would call here, or include here, for example, ecology, forestry, to some extent urban forestry, where there could still be tensions between arboriculturalists and urban foresters, but especially also landscape architects. How do we make sure that our knowledge, our specific expertise as arboriculturalists is truly integrated? How do we speak each other's language? How do we make sure that the limitations that we have in terms of growing trees are recognized? So I would say if we want to collaborate, people have to recognize us and we have to recognize them. We have to make sure that we show the limitations of trees, not just the benefits. We have to be honest about having the right tree in the right place. We have to be open and honest about the limitations in terms of allergies or trees sometimes emitting volatile organic compounds and maybe not being the best trees for the right place. We have to call and make sure that we get enough growing space for our trees and don't compromise too much on that. So I think based on that and on the actual knowledge and the fact that we are the experts when it comes to urban trees, we should engage in truly meaningful collaborations. And if we do that through the eyes of the other disciplines that often have much more political clout, I think we can promote our field. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, great. Lots to think about there actually in all three of those presentations. We've had quite a few questions coming in, and we received a couple of questions before the program started as well. Oh, now everyone's throwing them in. Yeah, you were waiting until the end. I see what you were doing. Okay, well, let's start with quite a broad question possibly that's come in. It's going to be difficult to summarize in just a minute, but we had a question from Mark Johnston before the program started. And Mark's been doing some research into the history of professional arboriculture in Britain. And he asks, what has promoted the status of arboriculture over the past 50 years in Britain? And what has held it back? What's promoted art in Britain in the last 50 years and what's held it back? It's a lot for just 1 minute, but we're going to try it. Sharon, you first, please.
What's promoted is the public awareness of trees through the Tree Council campaign, Plant a Tree in '73, the work of the professional bodies, which is increasing, and actually trees and the public awareness of caused by Dutch elm disease going back into the 70s to ash dieback now, where people can see that there's a problem that needs solutions. What's holding it back is lack of funding, local authorities being under-resourced, children not being taught that it's a career option rather than just trees are great, and a fundamental, actually perhaps a collective low esteem in the past. We didn't big ourselves up enough, and I think that's changing.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sharon. Greg?
Well, with that question coming from Mark, I think I should probably say the Trees and Towns book series. But on a more serious answer, the research that's gone into researching urban forestry and publications, I think, has done a really fantastic thing of raising the profile to an extent. I think over the past 50 years, I've only been in the industry for the last 11 or so, but with successive changes of legislation, it's brought in greater responsibilities and obligations, which has led to more opportunities, I think, for tree professionals. I think professional standards coming in, the move to higher education courses, giving us more parity with other more visible and better known industries and professions. I think also as time goes on, more and more people being aware of trees, having a greater awareness, and I think that leads to more demand for professional services. In terms of what's held the industry back,
in 2 seconds,
still quite a young industry. Yeah, people not knowing enough about us. Sorry, I went on a bit too long there.
Thanks, Greg. Cecil?
Okay, 3 things on both sides of the equation here. So I think what has promoted the industry has, first of all, wider recognition of the importance of trees. And that has been held by, second of all, good research, a lot of good research showing the benefits of trees, but also the way we should establish them, grow them, and manage them. And thirdly, I think the professionalism that we've seen emerging. Arboriculturists today are much more professional, much better skilled than they probably would have been several decades ago, for example, because of better training and better research. On the other side, what is holding us back in the UK, but also in other places, I think, is recognition of the profession. We're still a new field, as Greg was also saying, and that also then means actually that we have problems in terms of recruitment. How do we get enough talent to work in the industry? And third of all, and I'm really sad to say this, but we have seen a lot of turf wars. we've seen a lot of infighting within the industry, a lot of issues around personalities, etc., that have not always helped us very much. So I think we see definitely some of these issues that have hindered us over time, and that we should be able to deal with as we move ahead.
Okay, and I think maybe related to that, several people have asked a very similar question, but I'll pick the one that the way it's been worded from Fiona. The speakers have mentioned the difficulty in pronouncing the word arboriculture. Why not move towards a more user-friendly term and one which is internationally recognised by laypersons and other professionals, such as urban forestry or urban foresters? Is the word arboriculture part of the problem? Greg?
Personally, I prefer the term arboriculture and arboriculturist over urban forester, but that was just a personal preference. I do think there comes a point where perhaps we're just banging our heads against the wall and fighting a losing battle and getting to people to know what we're called. So I think urban forestry, although forestry is more implication of managing trees to cut them down, if we can sort of reposition the term urban forestry and urban forester, and I think perhaps that may be the way forward to go in terms of how we refer to ourselves, because it's a more recognisable term, I think.
Cecil?
It's an interesting question, I think, and as you know, I'm an urban forester. I call myself an urban forester, but I would also be very happy if people would call me an arboriculturalist. So I think it's two terms that have their issues, right? Urban forestry also has issues. A lot of people think we're only talking about forests and we talk about urban forests. So I think we need both. And I think for me, an arboriculturalist is somebody who has maybe more in-depth knowledge about the individual tree, where the urban forester comes in more from the ecosystem perspective, and the two probably will meet in the middle. So I think we need both. I do agree that we haven't really found the perfect maybe word for it yet, but to try to think of something else right now probably is not the best way forward. I think we have to stick to what we have and make sure we brand it, we promote it, and also have it recognized as a chartered profession.
And Sharon?
Well, I agree with both our panelists. I think that arboriculture is not just an urban practice. I carry out a lot of work in rural areas, so to be called an urban forester would not represent the work that I do. A lot of people can't say it, sometimes I can't, or spell it, but nevertheless, it's not perfect, but I think we need to focus on actually doing the job well visibly rather than agonizing too much on our name.
Okay, great stuff. Well, lots of questions coming in. One targeted specifically at Cecil, but we'll open this out across the board as well. This is from my very good friend Paul in Papua. Hi, Paul. Thanks for joining us. Cecil, in our government in Papua, we have central government, provincial government, and local district government. It's a challenge to collaborate. What strategy can you think of to make sure that the policy in urban forestry management from central government is delivered well to the local district government, according to your experience working in different countries? So collaboration between different layers of government, I suppose.
Excellent question. Thanks, Paul. Great that you're joining us today. So governance is one of my areas of research that I'm really interested in. And I think one of the things that I've seen working well is when there's actually a true commitment of the national federal government to urban forestry. And that doesn't mean that they should provide very detailed guidance, but there should be some kind of strategy, an overall idea of where urban forestry in the country is heading. Some kind of support program, as we see in the United States with funding of research and practice, but also in a country like China where there's a national policy. But that should really be connected well within the local level strategies and policies. And the connection level is often the metropolitan region or maybe the provincial level. So I think it's a whole setup where actually every actor should be playing a role. But when it comes to the actual implementation of urban forest policy, that should really happen at the local level, because that's where you connect with local communities, with local needs, and also with local contexts that can be so different. But for sure, a national strategy, some kind of national framework for urban forestry, which is actually lacking in most countries in the world, I think will be a very important step.
Any thoughts on that, Sharon?
Well, I agree. I mean, in the UK, we are hopefully going to have a move towards local foresters having tree strategies, and that's starting with national tree strategies, which will then be filtered down to be bespoke to reflect the local environment and the local community. So it's all about leading with central government and that disseminating down, but the people on the ground to have a say as well. So it's top down, bottom up, to get it right, to make things different, make things happen on the ground. Communication.
Greg.
All that I really feel I can add to that is by the policymakers actively working with the people managing the trees, listening to what public expectations, but also just adequately funding and resourcing the people who will actually be delivering that, and then trying to keep that as coherent as possible through the channels. But ultimately, none of it can happen without appropriate funding and resourcing, I guess.
Well, that very neatly segues onto the next question I was going to ask anyway. I like it when that happens. It makes my life very easy. A question from Sarah. Thank you for 3 great presentations. I want all of the approaches. But as an industry, how do we resource moving forward on all 3 fronts? Because no single approach will deliver all of the important points that have been made. So how do we go about ensuring we have proper resources in our industry? Sharon.
Well, we have to start at the top, like we've just said, so segueing back, if that's even a thing, we need to keep lobbying the professional bodies and the members of the public, need to be lobbying government and local government for change to put trees high on the political agenda. Also, the membership bodies are also working with career choices so that children are being taught that working with trees is an option. And we also need to be lobbying for better resources for local authorities so that they can do their job well and be visible and then involve the community in tree planting, tree care, and also tree celebration. So it's about lobbying all of those sectors by doing our job well and being noisy. Big question.
They're very big questions, and we have to scatter all over the place. But that's great. Greg, what's your thoughts on that one? How do we properly resource our industry?
Yeah, no, sorry, I was just preparing my answer. I think, we need to do a better job of shouting about what we do and how good we are at it. At the moment, it tends to, I'm not criticising them whatsoever because they do a very, very valuable role, but it tends to be the tree charities who are more vocal than we are as a profession. I know some absolutely brilliant people in the tree charities, but not all of them have the same level of experience as we do as tree management professionals. So I really think we need to be much more vocal in letting people know what we do and what we can do and why we're important, while at the same time collaborating with professional bodies, with tree charities, with local and national policymakers to try and deliver that as much as possible to benefit tree management ultimately.
Cecil?
Yeah, I think these are really good points. A big question, but I think an important part is actually to identify the people that are good at certain things to actually do it. So as Greg was already saying, we're often too humble, we're holding back, so we need to identify people in our trade, but even outside our trade, that have good communication skills and can function as champions in promoting the field and dealing with some of these issues. From my perspective as an educator, in my program, the Urban Forestry program, where students have a 4-year education, I try to identify students with specific interests and skills early on and try to nudge them in the direction of, for example, focusing more on communication or focusing more on design issues to make sure that actually identify a skill set or work with a skill set that can prepare them better to push these agendas forwards. But I would also really, in this case, actually agree very much with Sharon's point today. I think the professional associations will play a crucial role in meeting many of these demands. And of course, they have to mobilize their membership, individual members, to actually make it work.
Okay, great stuff. So the next question, I'm going to go to Chris Wright. Chris has submitted several questions today, but I'm going to go for the shortest one, Chris, not the one that would have taken me 5 minutes to read out. Maybe an inappropriate question, but do the panelists think that arboriculturalists are paid enough on average at the entry level and above to draw more people into the industry? Greg, what do you think about
that? No. When I worked for the Royal Parks, I worked at Griswold and Thomas and City and Suburban, and amongst other contractors, and they could only pay their staff what clients were paying them, and there are some really talented and promising tree surgeons coming through who would end up leaving because just the job, what they're getting paid, wasn't worth the physical labour they're putting their bodies through. I've known far too many people leave arboriculture to go off and become an electrician or a plumber, because they're so much better paid jobs and they're actually more respected. It's a bit of a tricky one. How do you start increasing the pay when the companies paying them have huge overheads and aren't getting paid a lot themselves? And I think that ultimately comes back from greater awareness of trees and then greater funding, so the local authorities can pay tree surgery companies the wage that they should be paid, as well as greater awareness from domestic clients that you should pay several £100s for the tree to be correctly pruned rather than a cheap amount to have it cut in half.
Thanks, Greg. Cecil?
I agree. I think arboriculturists in general are not paid enough, and I think part of it is because of a misunderstanding of the skill set that they bring, right? It's not only about manual skills or being able to prune trees, but it's also about all the knowledge that comes with it, which is pretty demanding, actually. And I think the fact that now arboriculture in many countries has actually been deemed an essential service during the current pandemic shows already that actually tree work provides all these different benefits, essential benefits, and these benefits are not really reflected in the type of pay that entry-level arboriculturists actually are receiving. So, but again, I think it has to do with misunderstanding of our profession, of our trade, and the need to actually promote the full skill set and all the good things that we're doing as professionals.
Sharon?
No, we're not at entry level. I used to be MD of an ecology, landscape and arboricultural practice, paid them all the same. In order to, in private practice, you've obviously got to make enough money, and in the early days there was the expectation that tree reports would be really cheap, and actually I think that's improving. In local government, again, a tree officer has been seen and often still is as a sort of side role and is undervalued. I think it's possible to earn a good salary or a good wage when you're senior in consultancy, but it comes down to belonging to a professional organisation. If it's right for you, being chartered, and it's that we need to push ourselves with our professional bodies to show the highly complex work that we do. And I think it's slightly better, but we're not there yet.
Brilliant, thank you very much. So the next question, we'll take one from Bangladesh, just 'cause it's very exciting to have an audience all over the world. So thank you, Frida from Bangladesh. Question specifically for Cecil. How can an environmental sciences graduate collaborate with arboriculture? Well, I suppose I just broaden that out a little bit. Cecil can take that one, but more broadly, I suppose, how can we collaborate with graduates and people coming out of degrees and education like that? Cecil?
Yeah, so I think on the one hand, of course, we have arboriculturists that are, let's say, within a narrow sense of the field, right? The people who have an arboriculture education and are trained to be an arboriculturist. On the other hand, I think there's a broader term. People could actually be arboriculturists, but not being trained per se as such, but actually dealing with management, planning, design of trees or tree landscapes in some way. Urban forestry is a really good example of that. We get people coming into our fields here at UBC that have very, very different backgrounds. Environmental sciences, planning. Some people come from business or economics and want to do something different. And I think we should cherish that diversity. But of course, it's a balance. On the one hand, we need to have the diversity. On the other hand, we have to have also this well-defined profession and trade. And I think both go together. So as an environmental science grad, I think you have a really important role to play, because you will come with your specific skill set that will be super important in collaboration with other tree and other green professionals. So you can actually start calling yourself an urban forester or somebody with an arboricultural interest and promote yourself in that way as well. So absolutely, you have a very big role to play in our field.
Sharon?
Yes, many of us come through different paths into arboriculture, and that brings a diversity of thought that is so useful for pushing the industry forward. The other point, which is slightly in relation to the question, is we all should be advocates, and by being advocates we should speak to new graduates or preferably undergraduates by going into these different sorts of degrees that are related to arboriculture, tell them what the job entails. So it's great that people are coming from different disciplines. They all have something to bring. Equally, we need to be clear to others what we do and why we do it.
Greg?
I think that some of our professional and trade bodies should I know that they are already to an extent, but being at university careers fairs, promoting arboriculture as a career. But in terms of environmental sciences, like Sharon said, it's a different background, sort of diversity of background and experience. But also, as trees and urban forestry seems to be included more and more in green infrastructure, I think having environmental science graduates with interest in arboriculture coming through as arboriculturists and green infrastructure professionals should be a really fantastic way of working collaboratively if we look through that.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Okay, let's go off on a slightly different tangent now. A question from John. Isn't the problem that political ideologies change so regularly, especially at a local level? Arboriculture needs to be apolitical for any long-term strategy to succeed. I think that's a really important question. How do we make arboriculture seen as that long-term strategy transcending political timeframes? Sharon, you first on that one.
Well, we have the wisdom and the absolute facts based on research of what a tree is and what it does and how it influences how people live. So it should always be apolitical. And it's about having a presence. If you're an arboriculturalist in local authority or an arboriculturalist in a charity, and also within private practice, by having a presence based on fact and based on research and aspiration, you should automatically transcend political whim. And if you have some rather unfortunate systems in some local authorities, which have led to, say, Sheffield, for example, we need to be vocal. So in a way, it's a great question, but we need to be together, we need to be strong, and we need to be focused.
Greg?
I think we can lobby and we can be vocal and active while remaining apolitical at the same time, because different parties and governments will bring in different policies, but a good policy is a good policy, a bad policy is a bad policy, ultimately. I think, sort of plugging my own thing here, but through public engagement, the benefits of trees will always remain the same and only get more important. So by the public being more aware of what trees do for them and the people who work for trees and advocate for trees, and hopefully that can lead to greater public support, which will in turn hopefully influence local government, which hopefully in turn influence national government. Can only be hopeful on that front, but I think there's very much a way to be active and vocal while remaining apolitical at the same time.
Cecil?
Yeah, I think research, as we heard before, is key. So to show that we are professional, we base ourselves on the state of art research. And I think there's hope, even in one of the most polarized political environments right now in the United States. We see that trees, just before COVID hit, trees was one of the only issues where actually the two sides of the political spectrum could still agree and talk with each other. So I think that's the thing that we also have to realize, that trees are not connected to one specific political agenda. If you look at the history of certain countries, it has gone either way in terms of political orientation. So it's really important that we recognize that trees can be political. Of course, in many ways they are. But when it comes to promoting trees, but also some of the limitations that are related to planting trees, then I think we should really be fact-based and apolitical.
Okay, well, possibly a controversial one next, but several people have asked this, so I'm going to bite and I'm going to do it. Variations on this one, but I'll pick Oliver's. Do the panel think there are too many professional organisations within the industry, the result of which is a dilution of professionalism? Greg, put that one to you first.
If you look at professional bodies in arboriculture, and there's the AA, which started off as a trade body and now offers professional membership, and also the ICF, which has the Royal Charter. I know there was the ISA, but that hasn't got as much of a presence. It's still active to an extent, but I think ultimately there's only two professional bodies offering full-time membership specifically to arboriculture. So I wouldn't, unless I got that completely wrong, and if I do, my mistake. But I don't think that's necessarily too many, because they offer different things and different routes. Yeah, I don't think there's too many. There's a lot of below that groups like the LTOA, which I'm involved in, the HF, which do very specific things. No, I don't particularly think there is too much out there, to be honest.
Cecil, what do you think?
Interesting question. I think it depends where you are in the world as well. Well, we have people tuning in here from Bangladesh and from Papua New Guinea, etc. I think they would be super happy if they would have one organization, one association promoting the field. I think it depends very much on respective roles. And so, for example, if there's chartered status, that should be really well embedded, of course, in a certain organization. But it's also about collaboration and actually organizations trying to jointly engage in agendas and promoting the field. So rather than saying there are too many, I think it's more about how these organizations actually collaborate and have their own respective strengths and weaknesses.
Sharon, what do you think?
I'm actually really glad that there's two main organisations, because they're both great and they both bring slightly different things to the table, and where they don't, we can collaborate more. For example, we can collaborate more on some events, but not all of them, because we have our own flavour, as it were. We could collaborate more on lobbying, but actually I've always been a believer of belonging to both, because there are some things that the Arbor Association do extremely well, and they are also a trade body and take care of the arborists, as we're now going to call them. And the Institute has a chartered membership, but both organisations have professional membership. They're great for learning, they're great for networking, and we should embrace very slight differences, embrace diversity in everything we do.
Brilliant. Successfully navigated that one. Good work team. So next question now, again, a bit of a different one from Margaret. Do you think it's important to try to reduce plant blindness in communities, i.e. the ability to identify plants and trees? What strategies might be able to reduce plant blindness? And if I can take a liberty, sorry, Margaret, and to expand that out, a general disconnect between people and nature, I think, is often at the core of a lot of the failure to understand the importance of trees in arboriculture. Sessile, have you got any thoughts on plant blindness?
I do, and first of all, I have to apologize for my own geographical blindness. I was referring to Papua New Guinea. I was, of course, talking about Papua, which is in Indonesia, right? So, but in terms of plant blindness, absolutely agree. I think there should be a part of any education these days is that at least children should have some kind of understanding of the species in their direct environment. And I remember when I was going to school back in the days, this was part of what we learned. Today, I think it's often not the case. So I think a certain set of species should definitely be something we talk about. Of course, because we have such diverse classrooms these days with children coming from all over the world, for example, here in Vancouver, we should broaden that, of course, and children should be able to talk about some of the plants they're used to, maybe from their culture as well. So I fully agree. I think plant blindness is a thing, and it's really shocking if a child doesn't even know if it's an oak or a beech or a birch tree, right? So there's definitely a big task ahead of us, and I think Greg would probably be one of the people who can answer this question best.
Sharon?
Well, yes, it is a problem, and thinking about initiatives that are going forward, like the forest school movement in the UK is much slower than in other parts of, say, Northern Europe, but that's a great way to get people to notice their plants. The increasing sort of wildlife programs on the telly, the brilliant Urban Tree Festival, well done, the work done by the charitable bodies, but actually whatever we do in ARB, we should be encouraging people to think about the trees in their area. I had a conversation with an architect this morning about placemaking through tree planting in different zones. So wherever we have the chance, we should be saying, think about this, put a label on that tree. How much carbon dioxide does it absorb? What surface runoff does it absorb, mitigate? And how much is it worth in CAVAT? So that sort of novel approach that's being employed wakes people up to just not thinking it's a green lollipop, but it actually has an ecosystem service as well.
Greg, what do you think? You've been doing a lot to try and cure plant blindness recently, I know.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. One thing that's done, nothing to do with me actually, my neck of the woods in North East London, in Walthamstow, one thing that really took off was writing on chalk on the pavements what the tree species were. So if you walk around all areas of London now, you see the names of trees chalked on the pavement. And that's extended to wildflowers. incorrectly named weeds growing in the cracks of pavements on walls. So all around London now, you've got all these names of plants being chalked on the pavement, which is amazing. People really taking notice of that. One thing that I've done an awful lot, I do tree ID walks, sort of winter tree ID and summer tree ID on my walks, try and encourage people to sort of learn the process of tree identification. But also, a lot of us just walk past the tree and barely notice it's there sometime. And what I found with a lot of the tree walks I do is when you start talking about trees as symbols of heritage and culture, people start to notice it more. Like, you know, the turkey oak as an example, if you tell people how that's the most disappointing tree of all time, how people thought because it was so fast growing they get this amazing timber from it 3 times as quick, but it turned out to be a rubbish timber. You start telling people the stories behind the trees, or you tell them all the folklore behind hawthorn as one example, all of a sudden people just really engage more. And
if anyone wants to learn more about Greg curing plant blindness, they can tune in to the Urban Tree Festival. Sorry, Greg, I've got to be cruel. I'm sorry.
That's fine. I do waffle.
No, it's all gold. It's all gold, mate. Right then, so next question. One I'm going to sort of aim at Sharon from Paul. Although professionalism is advancing, do you think that arboriculture is traditionally seen as more of a manual trade and thus dissuading many bright young people?
Not so much now, no. I think it certainly was. I've been in arboriculture since the late 80s, and there is a real change. I think that when you're dealing with other professionals, which most of us are on a daily basis, I never get the impression that I'm considered to be of a lower profession, that I've come up through the tools, etc. So I think it's changing. It's changing by being professional ourselves, by, you know, our work speaks for itself, how we communicate, our membership accreditations or chartership. So I think that is changing for the better. I wonder what other people think.
Let's find out. Greg, what do you reckon?
When I was at school in sixth form, in like the early mid-2000s, the prospect of working with trees was never put forward as a career. The school I was at, the sixth form, they're very much focused on pushing people to sort of their degree level within white-collar management jobs. So, yeah, it was never really pushed forward as a viable career. And then sort of you got this weird dichotomy where the practical side of the element is very labour intensive. It's very incredibly skilled, but it's still seen as a trade. Then you move on from that to the landscape design, the tree officer, or the consultant, and all of a sudden it becomes much more still practical, but much more office-based. So there's this weird, I don't know, U-shaped curve. So again, I think it's talking about how good and professional we are, but also going through greater education and professionalism to really showcase that we are serious, hardened professionals who are very skilled at what we do.
Cecil, what do you think about that?
I think partly it's true, and I think it has to do with the perceptions rather than, of course, the fact that we actually moved on quite a bit. If we are a little bit self-critical, I think it has to do sometimes a bit with the myth forming that we've had in our profession, at least in some parts of the world. I'm thinking about North America. There's been a lot of macho culture around tree climbing and doing things in the trade that actually led to us having difficulty now sometimes to get over that image. So I am really happy to see, for example, in my classroom now that 60% of my students are women. So we see more diverse classrooms. So I think it's also part of that whole kind of rebranding and reinventing in a way of our profession. And as Sharon said already, I think a lot of good things are happening, but we are still fighting against a little bit of that image that we built up for ourselves maybe 30, 40 years ago.
It's interesting. I think that ties us in nicely again to a question that's just come in from Mark. I think I know the answer to this based on what you've just said, but it's an interesting perception that still exists. Do you think that practical arborist experience is important as a precursor to becoming a qualified arboriculturalist? Greg, what do you think? Practical experience critical?
I think it's important, but I wouldn't say it's critical. I was on the tools before doing what I'm doing now. I climbed for a bit. Wasn't a very good climber, in all honesty. And if I look at what I knew then compared to what I know now, I'm far more knowledgeable. And I think coming off the tools does give you a very, very good perspective and a different perspective, but then we don't want an industry for the people who think the same way, who approach problems in the same way. We need as many working together, but as much different diversity of background and experience and approach as possible to keep things innovative and moving forward, rather than getting trapped in one way of thinking, which I'm not saying, obviously it's great to have that experience coming in, but it's not the only experience that we should be having.
Cecil?
Yeah, I would agree. And if I look again at my student population here, I have a few people who have actually arborist backgrounds, who have done an arborist degree and have been practicing arborist. They're fantastic students, and they're wonderful to have in the classroom because they add a layer of expertise. They are very enthusiastic. They really know where they're going with their careers. But probably I wouldn't like to have a classroom with only those people, right? So you need to have a mix. And I think it's very important to have people that have that practical background. They will make great urban foresters as well. But there will be people with other backgrounds that will be very interesting, like somebody with public health background or somebody with a landscape architecture background that wants to go the urban forestry or arboricultural route. So I think, I fully agree with Greg. We need it all. It's important, but it's not critical per se.
Sharon?
Well, ironically, I'm going to be an echo chamber here and agree with everything that the other two panelists have said. We need diversity. Of course, being on the tools is a great start at ARB, but it isn't the only route. If it was, it would be boring. Some of us came through local government, or I have a landscape degree. There are a multitude of different paths, such as we talked about the gentleman with the environmental science background. The more diversity we have, not only in training, backgrounds, gender, ability, the better, because we've got to keep pushing things forward.
Okay, let's try and dig out a question that you might not agree on, because it's all a bit of a love-in at the moment.
Yeah, it is a love-in.
This is just not working at all. I was supposed to get someone bad or mean or something on the panel. We failed 2 weeks running because you're all too lovely. How about this then? You, from an anonymous submission, you say the profession is developing and evolving a lot. Do you think the responsibilities of the arborist profession are widening as it develops, or focusing and narrowing? That's an interesting one. Cecil, what do you make of that?
I think widening, in the sense that arboriculturists, arborists, urban foresters are involved in many more aspects than they might have been before. And I think that's an opportunity, but it also could be a challenge, right? Because it will actually call upon different skill sets and different knowledges. For example, communication has come up today, being able to work in political climates, being able to engage with publics, etc. So I think it probably will lead to a diversification within our field. So we actually will train different types of arborists and different types of urban foresters. So I do see a widening, but then within that, I think is also a narrowing, maybe in terms of specific key expertise that some of us will have as professionals.
Sharon?
Yes, I think it's widening, and because of that, we'll have more specialists. So it's widening because the work that trees have to do, and it is acknowledged as having to do, is much greater. Ecosystem services, public health, as well as all the usual things that trees do. It's also widening because of all the challenges of increasing urbanisation and trees having to fit in cities, particularly in the developing world. But within that, as I say, people will be focused and narrow and be experts at, say, GIS or iTree or tree planting. So but that's how professions evolve, don't they? They get wider with more experts along that field.
Greg, what do you think?
I think over the years the scope has widened, but I think as individuals it's becoming more narrow. I think because we're developing specialisms in specific areas, but I think in terms of how the education system's geared up, fundamentally it pushes it ultimately in one of two routes, maybe, on the sort of tree health and risk management side or the planning side, and then to sort of expand beyond that, you almost have to retrain in a different specialism almost to get beyond that. I think the general scope has widened, but I think as individual professionals it's pushing us into narrower alleyways, maybe.
Okay, we've got time for 2 or 3 more questions, so it's 7 o'clock now, but we'll go until about 10 past, quarter past or something. I want to try and bring sort of 2 questions together here slightly, one from Mark and one from Ian. Mark says surely the most reasonable way forward is a combination of all 3, which I think we all agree of. a significant constraint is the lack of qualification routes into arboriculture. So that's one side. And then Ian's question, with higher education in arboriculture at an all-time low, how can the panel suggest that they can really deliver the outcomes of their arguments in the long term? So two questions there really about routes into arboriculture and why the HE provision, higher education provision, is so low at the moment. Sharon, have you got any thoughts on those two?
Well, it's so disappointing where, for example, Pershore College recently closed its ARB course, and it is also baffling to me. I know that all professional bodies are working hard to reach young people. There's a tremendous initiative called Tree Sparks, started by a young lady at Bangor University, which is really innovative. We've just got to keep banging it on with it, reaching young people, and in doing so, being more professional, changing the image that might be in parents' minds that arboriculture is not a suitable career for their bright young thing. I'm sad about it, and I think we just have to keep trying and reaching out and be advocates individually and through our professional bodies. No easy answer, I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm. Greg, what do you think?
I think one of the great things about the education system in arboriculture is that we have a range of certificates and diplomas at level 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6 and 7. I remember when I looked at ecology courses and various other things, it was just degree level, and there wasn't an equivalent to like the level 4 diploma in arboriculture that I could find for something else, like ecology or whatever. So I think that's something that arboriculture has that other professions don't always offer. But again, I go back to my experiences at school. The sixth form team, if you weren't going to go to university, they wouldn't give you careers advice, and you know, no one knew what arboriculture was in my year group at school. It just wasn't seen as a viable career. No one knew about it, so why would people go and do it? I think we really have to, I think this is not more for the professional bodies and the individual consultants and tree officers, but we have to really, really push hard and shout loudly about what the job is and what the entry routes are and how you can become qualified in it.
Cecil, you're in education. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think we have issues, and it depends a bit where you are in the world again. Sometimes there's even a basic education lacking in some countries. What I've most experienced with is the kind of degree programs, and there it's a struggle. Even here in Canada, it's a struggle to set up educational degrees in arboriculture at a higher level or urban forestry. So one example, we are developing a Master of Urban Forestry Leadership. I've been working on that for 4 years. Our provincial ministry here finds that it's not a relevant program in a way because there are no jobs out there that are called urban foresters right now. So it's a bit of chicken and egg, of course. On the one hand, there is a need. There's obviously a need that people want to have these green leaders, but maybe they don't call them urban foresters. They call them green infrastructure planners, or they call them sustainability experts. So I think here again, the professional associations have a big role to play to make sure that people are aware of what is an arboriculturalist, an arborist, what is an urban forester, what do they stand for, and to make sure that we, because we know from, for example, a study in the US, that there's thousands of jobs out there that could be called urban forestry, arboriculture, and there's a big demand for people coming into the profession. So yeah, education at all levels, and based on a real clear definition or explanation of what our profession is.
Okay, so we've got time for a couple more. We've had some really good questions come in late, so we're just going to try and rush through them because I want to know the answers as much as anyone else does. Good question here from Chris, and I'm going to start with you, Greg. As a generalist, not a specialist, with some conservation background and with limited resources, if we want to develop a tree strategy in our town, where do we start?
As a Tree Life student, I should give a shout out to the Tree Life Tree Strategies module. I know they're offering a tree strategy development course seminar. I don't know if that's been moved online, but at some point I'm pretty sure they'll be running it again. I can't recommend that enough. I think that was a great module when I did that with Tree Life. One thing that I always found was just going online, finding as many examples of tree strategies as possible, looking at the good ones, looking at the not so good ones. The Keniston Gardens tree strategy is a really good one. I say that not just because I was involved in it, but it sets out a lot of time-bound targets and specific goals. The Woodland Trust about 10 years ago produced a guidance on tree strategies. Tree Council and other organisations are trying to push tree strategies as well at the moment. Trees and Design Action Group have done quite a bit of work. There's some good resources out there, just not necessarily in one place.
Thanks, Greg. Cecil, what do you think?
I agree. I think they're good examples. I think it's also about asking around, looking at some other municipalities or other local authorities that are a little bit similar to yours. I would like to give a shout out to TDAC, the Tree and Design Action Group. We have a really excellent website with some great resources. There's actually some really great work that was done back in the days by Cape Space in the UK, and I think some of their work is still available online. So they have an excellent way, for example, of developing green space strategies, really good document. And in the United States, there's something called the Vibrant Cities Lab, which also has a really good, some really good templates of strategies. So I think good resources out there, and as Greg said, sometimes a bit fragmented, but a little bit of searching will probably give you some great examples.
Sharon.
It's hard to know how to add to that. Really good to hear about the Tree Life course. Of course, recommend looking at other strategies and also the great work that TDAG has done. I'm actually just going to speak, albeit on Zoom, with tree officers who've written a really good tree strategy, and then to go and speak to the local people about what they want and what's important to them. So it's a combination, as I said earlier, of top-down, good advice and research, but reflecting what's happening locally, both in terms of tree population and human population.
Absolutely. I should just add to that as well to say something that Rob Northrop's always said as well, which is it's all about social values. Find out what's important to people and try and fit that rather than telling them a whole load of stuff that's good for them. So, right, one last question, because I like it and it's a nice way to finish, and then we'll move on to our summary from the panel. This is from Andrew. As an environmental science student who's interested in a career working with trees, can the panel recommend the best ways to get into arboriculture? And feel free, panel, to give us a brief summary within a minute of how you got into arboriculture, if that would be useful. Cecil, let's start with you.
Oh, that's an easy and also difficult question, I think. It's definitely check out some of the programs that you'll be interested in. Try to see if you can to speak with a local arborist and maybe do a little bit of on-the-job, go along with a person to get a bit of an idea of the breadth of the field. In my case, a love for nature and going out to nature developed into a wish to do biology, and realizing that biology for me would be too boring because I wanted to work with people. So all of a sudden I realized urban forestry is the perfect blend, or arboriculture would be the perfect blend of social and ecological stuff. So, but definitely I think try to talk with people you know or in the professions, or try to get connections to those people, because those personal stories I think will be really useful as you shape your own career and try to choose where you want to be educated.
In 20 seconds, Cecil, how did you get into arboriculture?
Basically by chance. So I was really not at all, I didn't know there was a thing like that. I was asked once to chair a student group on urban forestry. I liked it and I stayed in it. So it's just, for me, it turned out to be the perfect mix, as said. So I think a lot of people, as said, even in the green professions, even studying forestry, I was not aware of the field. So we have a big learning curve there.
Sharon.
Well, I think we all have a responsibility to be advocates. So if somebody approaches you and says, I'm thinking of having a career in art, we should offer them at least a day's work experience. And I would then encourage that individual to try and work in a local authority for a day, etc. So we need to be open-hearted and open-minded. Also, I would encourage anybody to look at the ICF and the AA website for careers advice. It's a brilliant resource. There are individual videos on there. There are lots of career histories that will really help them. And then also to do a course that actually works for them practically, because it's a big slog and you've got to make it work with you. So my 20 seconds, I'm a failed astrophysics university entrance. I then did a general degree, and then I started the postgrad in landscape architecture. I argued with everybody and thought it wasn't for me. I just like being outside with trees. And in my late 30s, I then did another course, the brilliant Tree Life course. And then my career took off from then. So yeah, quite an unusual path.
Thanks, Sharon. Greg, your turn.
I started off as a conservation volunteer in a country park near where I grew up. Spent a couple of years just doing with the management and conservation volunteering, and sort of progressed to dragging branches into a chipper and some tree surgery work and gardening. But if you're doing a degree level course, I'd sort of recommend should probably give a shout out to Training Tree as well as Tree Life, as well as the colleges. If you're doing a degree, then you could probably after that do sort of like the level 4 diploma. That's a very, very, very good course. It complements an existing degree quite well. Other than that, if finances are there, look at student memberships of the AA and the ICF. Some really amazing resources on there, especially the Arbor Association's online learning now. And also groups like the Ancient Tree Forum, see what events they're running, if there's any local to you. They're really fantastic. Other groups, London Tree Officers isn't quite as public facing, but they've got some brilliant resources on the website. And depending on where you are, look at the local friends groups. If there's any tree walks, any public engagement, or if you're near to London, come on one of mine.
Oh, look at that. He managed to squeeze in one last pitch for himself. I knew it would happen. Okay, thank you very much. So what we're going to give you now is 1 minute each, or up to 1 minute, just to sort of summarise your position, summarise what you think, and let us know your closing thoughts. So first of all, Sharon.
We've got important work to do. We've got to shout out for trees, and together we are stronger. By being the highest possible professional level that you can be, you'll be recognised by your peers and by other professions and seen not to be some person out of the woods in scruffy clothes. So I believe that being a member of a professional body is a good way to promote the future of arboriculture.
Thank you very much, Sharon. Greg, closing statement.
I think all three aspects we're talking about are all fundamentally vital to the industry, but I especially go for public engagement, because if it wasn't for that, I wouldn't have had my entry into this career. And I think as experts and professionals, we have to take responsibility in the message that's being put out there for people to learn and understand. And fundamentally, not enough people know who we are and what we do, and we need to actively work with community groups to rebuild that trust of public tree management and re-engage communities so they can value trees more, and then hopefully that can just be a better deal for trees in general.
Thank you. Cecil, your thoughts?
Yeah, it's a good time for trees. There's a lot of focus on trees. There's a lot of focus on the good things they can do for us. But for us to make sure this opportunity is capitalized on, we need to collaborate. And there are two reasons for that. One is we cannot do it alone. We need to work together with engineers, with public health professionals, with landscape architects, etc., to make meaningful solutions that go across different aspects of how we deal with trees and the benefits they provide. Second of all, unfortunately, we're still a weak profession in the sense that politicians don't really listen to us. So other professions have already moved up that ladder, public health professionals, urban planners, etc. They have the ear of the decision makers. So through them, we can actually promote our issues. And then the time will come at some stage that we climb up that ladder ourselves. But collaboration will be crucial for promoting our field.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Okay then, so let's bring up our poll again, please. If you will, moderator. It's Sarah, really. She has a name. I'll just call her moderator because that sounds very professional. There we go. So everybody vote on what you now think is the most important or the best way for us to promote the importance of arboriculture as a profession. Professionalism and chartership, public engagement, that hasn't worked as well as it was supposed to work. And I can't help but feel that the dice has been loaded somewhat against Cecil, but I think that's a good thing. Cecil's just dropped out of it terribly. I feel like this is going to teach us less than it might have done otherwise.
It's a UK complot. Conspiracy.
Democracy always works out extremely well, Cecil. Always trust the British public in a vote. That's what I say. So I think we may as well stop this now because it's going to get a bit confusing and we'll have to do lots of maths and it's not going to work very well. But public engagement is still heading up the list. Which is what it was doing before. So let's just assume they can probably edit this later and I'll say, wow, look at that. Public engagement's still top. And then I'll do a voiceover and no one will know the difference. So good. There we go. Everyone participated. Thank you very much. Okay, so barring that last minute hiccup, I think that was really interesting. Thank you so much to all of our panelists, and thank you to you at home for watching and listening. I certainly have got a lot to go and think about. Actually, I think that was a really interesting discussion. We'll be doing another one of these in a couple of weeks' time, so keep an eye out for that. The Arbor Association is also doing a special webinar about ancient trees on Wednesday, so you can find out information about that online. That's with Jill Butler and Camille Witkowskanash. It's going to be fantastic, and loads more stuff online on our website and our online resources area. So please check it out. Stay safe, look after each other, and hopefully we'll see you very soon. Take care. Bye-bye.